And we would debate everything from theology to politics. Did you ever get mad at me in those times? Because my humor can be a little edgy.
The very first day that I anchored GMA, we're getting ready to go live. It's a 2-shot. The camera's zooming in on us. Our mics aren't hot yet. And you look over at me, and do you remember what you said?
Yeah, I do.
What did you say?
I said, don't embarrass me.
So my question for you today is this. Do you have friends in your life who are different than you? And when I say different, I'm talking about different opinions, different views, ideology, race, religion, socioeconomics, etc. Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Paula Ferris Show. I am your host, Paula, and we are in the midst of a series on friendship. And we're looking at friendship from a lot of different angles. Last week, we talked about the importance of having deep friendships in our lives and how critical that is to our overall health and how we can cultivate those deep friendships. And today we are going to be talking about why it's important to have friends in your life who are different than you. And look, I get it. It's easy to gravitate to your comfort zone and your echo chamber and to people who are like-minded. That's just human nature, but it's also a recipe for anti-human growth. When I think of somebody in my life who is different than me, I can't think of anybody except Dan Harris, my dear friend, my former colleague at ABC News. Dan and I go way back, about 15 years. We co-anchored Good Morning America weekends together for a very long time. Dan and I could not be any more different. When I say we're polar opposites, we are absolute polar opposites. But I'm a better person because of Dan Harris, and I'm pretty sure that he would say the same thing about me. So Dan joins me today, and we are going to talk about the science and the reasoning behind the importance of having friends in your life who are different than you. We're also going to talk about how those differences helped us balance one another out, both professionally and personally. And we do dig into our thoughts about media bias, and it does exist. Make sure you stick around for my takeaways after the conversation. But without further ado, my dear friend, a friend who's very different than me, Dan Harris, on why it's important to have friends in your life who are different than you. Enjoy the conversation. Dan, it's good to see you, my dear friend.
Likewise.
Although you just insulted my dog, Addie, who decided to join me for this. She's very small, and you just gave her a complex.
All I said was that I have cats that are bigger than that dog.
Maybe you...
What I didn't say, but I will say now, is I think those cats could kick the shit out of that dog, probably. Well.
Oh, look at her. She's definitely an alpha. My sister had Dobermans, scared of her. So,
oh, really?
Yeah, mm-hmm.
I respect
Maybe
that.
your cats are bigger than my dog, who is 7 pounds, a little Cavapoo, because you feed them too much. Is that a possibility, Dan?
You know, we have one, that is definitely a possibility. We have one cat, Toby, who is so overweight. And it happened when we moved to the suburbs, and I think he was like a goldfish that's grown to the size of its bowl.
Oh, how many cats do you have now? You've always been a cat guy.
Well, we had until recently 3, and then my wife came home from the vet with a 4th.
Okay, wow.
So now we have 4.
Wow.
Yeah.
You're like almost to a basketball team, and you know that would be 5 because you're all into sports now because of your son.
Yes. That's been a huge change in my life.
Which is crazy. Sure. I can't wait to talk to you about that. I sent you a GIF because I know you're a cat guy. So I sent you a GIF yesterday, and it said, studies show that dog ownership reduces the risk of dementia by 40%, while cats make no difference. So I'm just going to leave that right there. Okay?
Is that true?
I don't know. I saw it on the internet. Of course it's true.
Well, then it's definitely true. Isn't that where you get most of your political information?
Yeah,
too?
There's no corroboration. There's no sourcing anything. If I see it, I believe it. You know?
Yeah.
Trust, don't verify. That's my motto. I saw it on Instagram. I've actually seen it pop up a couple of times, but that was just so funny. I didn't care whether or not it was true. I sent it to you just to razz you a little bit about your large cats. Your trove.
You know what? I do believe it, even if it's not verified yet. It makes sense.
You know what? I can't give you too much grief about cats because I did have a cat growing up named Peaches, and she was one of the loves of my life. She also was huge. I'm sure she could give Toby and all of your cats a run for their money. She was massive, like couldn't run.
Toby's problem is he won't run. even for money. So that's.
Should we get to the point? Should we keep all of this in?
Sure.
Do you think people want to hear it? I think they do, right? We're dear friends. We talk about random stuff. We give each other grief. That's what friends are supposed to do, right? A little bit.
Let's run the experiment.
Let's run the experiment. Okay, so Dan, we are talking about the importance of having friends in our lives that are different than we are, right? That could be race, religion, ideology, and politics. It could be socioeconomics. It could be geography. But the importance of having friends in our lives that are different than we are. And when I think of someone that is not polar opposite, but when I think of somebody who's very different than me, I think of you. And I adore you. But we make it work. And I think my life is richer because of having a friend like you in my life. I don't know if you feel the same. I mean, you might actually squash this whole experiment here by your response. But I'm just putting it out there. My life is richer. I've learned a lot, broadened my perspectives because of having you and other friends in my life that don't necessarily line up with me.
I totally agree with you about, the affection you expressed vis-a-vis me is as fully mutual. And I also agree with you that on a macro level, it's really good. And we'll talk about some of the science to have friendships that go beyond your little bubble.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it just pushes us in ways. I never really understood the importance of it, though, until I started to see some of the science and some of the research behind it. But I want to read this quote, Dan. And I actually sent you an outline because I'm a nerd like that. You used to make fun of me all the time because I had a nerd pad when I would anchor GMA. I always had a nerd. You called it my nerd pad. Do you remember this? It was a little notepad. I had to write everything down. So I sent you an outline of what this conversation is going to look like. And I sent you this quote. And I think it's really, really powerful. And the quote is, "It is human nature to find a sense of safety and validation in like-minded people, but it can also be a recipe for stagnating personal growth. Only knowing people like ourselves can make us more insular. It's an anti-growth arrangement, potentially causing feelings of disconnection from broader social conversations." That was from a relationships expert. The more I learn about the importance of having friends who are different than we are, the more I'm motivated to talk about it and to invest in those friendships. But I think before we even jump in about the importance in the science, do you want to just share how we know one another? Like we go back, 15 years-ish? Is that right? Something like that?
Yeah. When did you arrive at ABC News?
2011. I started,
Okay.
Yes, 2011, moved my small little family to New York City, started doing the overnight news, which I didn't even know, by the way, that ABC had an overnight newscast when I first interviewed for the job, but started doing the overnights, then got moved to general correspondent. And we started hanging out a little bit more then, but I think we really got close when I was promoted to weekend anchor at Good Morning America. That's when we really got close, don't you think? So that was ish, 2014, 2015?
Was it? No, it was before that, wasn't it? 2000.
No, because it was the year Landon, my youngest, was born in 2014. It was that year I remember because I came back from maternity leave and then I was promoted. But I feel like we were friends before that. Like we got close before that too. But then we really, really became fans of one another when we started anchoring the show together.
And where it becomes most relevant in some ways to this discussion is that every Saturday and Sunday morning when we were anchoring the show together, we would jointly interview a political analyst about the events of the day. Right. And this really obviously got quite kind of intense around 2016 with that presidential election. And we would have to work out the questions together.
Right.
And that would provoke a lot of discussions. And I would say even before that, we were having a lot of discussions about religion because just to step back, I often joke that I was raised in the People's Republic of Massachusetts. Both of my parents were hard left atheist scientists who had been serious hippies in the 60s at Stanford Medical School. We were sort of in the heart of, the summer of love and all that stuff. If you ask my mother where she was, we have a lot of people of the boomer generation, they remember where they were when a man landed on the moon. If you ask my mother where she was, she will tell you that she was at a Black Panther rally.
Oh my gosh.
Which is true. And they were doing sit-ins against the Vietnam War, and so if you those two streams were huge for me. One, being raised in a very liberal environment, and two, a not religious environment, and that is the polar opposite of how you were.
Right, but yet you still had a bar mitzvah, right?
Yes, and as I often joke, I did that just for the money.
My upbringing was totally different. I grew up in a very conservative Christian home in Michigan. My parents, they were both, my dad especially was wild, but they became deep Christians in like the early 70s during like the Catholic Church had this big charismatic renewal. So that was the house that I grew up in, is very strict. Okay, very conservative, very Christian. I couldn't wear two-piece bathing suits. I couldn't go trick-or-treating on Halloween. I mean, the pendulum swung pretty far one side before it kind of regulated itself. But I grew up in a totally different environment. And I remember, Dan, we're talking about our differences. When we were talking about our relationships, I got married at 24. Had you ever met anyone that got married that young? I remember you would say to me, gosh, I didn't know who I was at 24. I can't imagine getting married that young. And so I did feel like I was a bit of a freak in New York City, marrying my college sweetheart. But that was kind of the norm in the normie and the type of culture that I grew up in. Went to a small Christian school, married my college sweetheart at age 24. I don't think you'd really ever met anybody like me, and I hadn't really met anybody like you.
Well, I'll just say, so I had actually spent a lot of time covering evangelical Christians as a reporter.
Right.
So I actually did know, but they weren't friends. I knew and know your husband and kids, and so like we were in, and likewise with me, and so we were in each other's lives in a way, whereas that didn't apply to my travels in the Bible Belt as a skeptical reporter.
Right. I was like the subject of the person that you reported on. And
yes,
I mean, the goal of journalism is to maintain your neutrality. And I think we did. I think it was a healthy balance, because we have to acknowledge we have a bias. Everybody has an inherent bias based on how we grew up, right? Our surroundings, our childhood, that informs who we are. And so I think as reporters and journalists, we were very aware and cognizant to make sure that we were covering a story fairly based on our inherent bias. I mean, I don't think there's no such thing as bias-free news, because we all have a bias, and it's up to us to check that bias and make sure that we're covering it from a different angle. And so you were, I don't want to say an accountability partner, but I think we were kind of accountability partners, and we did a good job of pushing and pulling one another. Well, this is what it was like for me growing up. This is how, my family or friends or this subsect, this is how they feel about the issue. You would come at it from the same way. And I think we were a great team because of that. I think our differences made us really powerful when it came to how we worked together.
I completely agree. We should talk more about how that went. But as you were talking, I was realizing that in part working with you, and then also in part, personal development of many, many forms, and just growing older and learning, I have realized that I personally, and the media, or the mainstream media generally, were not and are not as unbiased as we like to think. In that era when I met you, I had been in the news business for 20 years and had been all over the world and covered war zones and political campaigns and terrorists and cult leaders and, everything.
Right.
And I felt with some degree of validity that, I was reasonably highly trained, and that I had proven to be even-handed in lots of different demanding environments. And so that had a certain amount of truth to it. And I think the truth of the matter is that getting to know you really exposed how badly at least ABC News, and I think this is true of the media writ large, the mainstream media, lacked ideological diversity.
Right.
That's not to say I never got directives to cover things from a liberal standpoint. In fact, the only times I ever got ideological directives were post 9/11, and they were coming from a more conservative standpoint. And, I would argue that we badly dropped the ball on covering George W. Bush and his claims about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't want to paint with too broad a brush here, but the truth of the matter is pretty much everybody I knew at ABC, with a few exceptions, you most notable among them, it was just taken for granted that we came from a liberal background.
Mm-hmm.
And there were safeguards in place, and there remain safeguards in place to be fair and even-handed. We have lawyers and standards and practices
absolutely.
people.
Mm-hmm.
But I just think it's just in the water to approach the world from a specific vantage point.
Right.
Anyway, I said a lot there. Do you agree?
I completely agree. I always felt like, because I grew up in Michigan, went to a small Christian liberal arts school in Ohio, married my college sweetheart, worked my way up in TV in Dayton and Cincinnati, lived in Chicago and then New York. And so I felt like I was exposed to a lot. Yes, I grew up in a conservative Christian home, but yes, that informs who I was and who I am. But I feel like I'm kind of a free thinker because of what I've been exposed to, who I've been exposed to. And I love the push and pull. Like, this is kind of where I thrive. The conflict feels like intimacy to me. It doesn't feel like, it doesn't threaten me at all. I will say one of my big struggles, and when we're talking about having friends that are different, we're not just talking about ideological and political differences. We're talking about race. We're talking about religion. We're talking about socioeconomics. We're talking about geography. One of my concerns when we were at ABC, and again, I acknowledge my bias. I think we all have to acknowledge our bias because we can't eradicate our bias. It informs who we are. But there have to be checks in place to make sure that we're covering a story from a fair perspective. And one of my issues and concerns was that there wasn't much ideological diversity. And I think newsrooms particularly are at their best, Dan, when there is that push and pull. When you have ideological diversity, you can bounce things off of one another and essentially save you from yourself. I think that's why the country and the media has been so shocked the last couple of elections because there isn't enough ideological diversity in newsrooms. You need people that don't look like you, that don't think like you, that aren't from where you are, that have a different background. You need that in order to maintain those checks and balances and to save you from yourself. I think the fact that essentially the media got caught with their pants down again is just an indication of how, I don't want to say out of touch, but it's the lack of ideological diversity in newsrooms. I think that's at the crux of the issue. And you and I, yes, I'm an independent. I'm a free thinker. There is no party or person that I'm going to give my vote to. I didn't vote when I was an active journalist because I just felt like that was my own conviction. But you and I are different in so many areas too. Like, I grew up in I would say lower middle class, lower income home. I grew up in the Midwest. So there's the geographical differences. There's the socioeconomic differences. Yes, the religion. We joked about doing a podcast called The Jew and the Gentile because I think we also embrace our differences. There's the ideological differences, but I can't underscore enough when it comes to media and our backgrounds, the importance. And this applies to CNN. It applies to Fox. It applies to everybody. You need ideological differences in your newsroom to make sure that you are covering the story with fairness and with balance. So that's what it's lacking.
I would agree. And just to make 2 points to build on that. One, just as it pertains to ABC News specifically, which is the only news organization that I know like very intimately, there actually is quite a bit of diversity when it comes to race, gender, and sexual orientation.
1,000%.
It's
Yes, I agree.
Probably almost certainly not enough at the leadership level at certain times. That has kind of improved over time, but certainly when I was there, that was an issue. And then the other thing to point out is I know DEI has become kind of a controversial concept these days, and I believe there are data to show that diverse workplaces, not just newsrooms, diverse workplaces work better. Teams where you have different points of view and different backgrounds work better.
I agree. I think it's the push and pull. And I worked at The View. I think The View's always been at its best when there are differing opinions. It makes it more interesting. And as a viewer, I trust any news organization that I am watching much more so if I know that their newsroom is ideologically different, geographically different. And you brought up a good point. Yes, we checked a lot of the boxes, the geographical differences, I think was another concern too. Like the fact that I grew up in a conservative Christian home and married my college sweetheart, and I was kind of a freak in the newsroom. Like I shouldn't be an anomaly because that's like half of the country, right? And so,
well, you were a freak in the newsroom for a lot of reasons.
And I'm still a freak. So, just ask anybody, especially my husband. I embrace that, though. I love that you can make fun of me and we can make fun of one another. And we're very self-deprecating. So I think that's also essential in a friendship.
We used to have most of our debates took place in the makeup room while we were getting makeup for the show. And we would debate everything from theology to politics. Did you ever get mad at me in those times? Because my humor can be a little edgy.
No, the only time I got mad at you, and we didn't shy away from the hard topics. Like, we talked about religion. We talked about theology. We talked about politics. We talked about some real heavy and hard things. The only thing that pissed me off, Dan, is we would have this funny banter behind the scenes, and then I would take it on camera. And then, and you would play like kind of Mr. Nice Guy. And I would get like threatening emails from people, especially women, saying I needed to stop making fun and stop poking fun at you. And I was like, if you had any idea, he just abused me in the makeup room. If you had any idea what he said when the cameras were off. The very first day that I anchored GMA, we're getting ready to go live. It's a 2-shot. The camera's zooming in on us. Our mics aren't hot yet. And you look over at me, and do you remember what you said?
Yeah, I do.
What did you say?
I said, don't embarrass me.
So you
and I used to.
You used to. I used to play that so hard, the Mr. Nice Guy, and I felt the wrath of it. That's the only thing that pissed me off. Yeah. So
I used to play this game where, like, as you know, in the commercial breaks, I would wind you up, and also the other Sarah Haynes, who's still on The View and was with us in those days on Weekend Good Morning America. And I would be just poking at you guys and getting you wound up. And then with the cameras go on and I would be Mr. Nice Guy and you guys would still be making fun of me. And then the viewers on Twitter would go nuts.
They went mental. We needed to stop. They were going to stop watching the show because it was unfair how we treated you. And I'm like, oh, you have no idea. None. But it was fun. And look, I mean, we used to make fun of you because you didn't know sports, right? Like you hired I think 9, and JJ was 9 or 10 at the time, to like run your fantasy football team for a couple of years. And I think he won.
That's right.
Like my son, you hired him to beat a bunch of your 50-year-old buddies. And he did. I think you guys won one year, didn't you? When he was 9 or 10?
Yeah.
Did you ever tell your friends that 9?
Oh, yeah. Everybody knew.
What did they say?
No, they were pissed. But they sent the money, which I gave to JJ.
Yes, you did. Thank you for funding him. So you invited my kids into our relationship and our friendship too. And I saw a lot of growth from you too when you became a father yourself too. That was really fun for me to watch because you guys weren't sure you were going to be able to have kids. And then just to see a different side of you, I think your world kind of opened up a little bit too.
Yeah.
And that kid, I can't believe, how old is Alexander now?
He's 10. And I kind of wanted a girl. I know I definitely wanted a girl. And,
you did?
And now I got this. Yeah,
you never admitted that to me.
He knows. But I'm very happy I got him. I remember one of the producers at Nightline, which was one of the places that I worked at ABC, Bianca was pregnant, and I was talking to Claire, this producer, and who had a bunch of kids. I was bemoaning the fact that I knew it was going to be a boy. And she said, he's going to be your little guy. Like he's going to go everywhere with you. And that has really stuck in my head because that is what happened. Like he travels with me on all my business trips, and I do a lot of traveling. I pull him out of school all the time, and we've been all over the world together. And he, as you know, got me interested in sports. I'm not really that interested, but I'm obsessed with him, so I follow it very closely. We go to sporting events all the time, talk about it all the time. So yes, if that counts as personal growth.
I think that, and that brings up like some of the science and research behind it. And I want to hear more about how you think you've grown personally because you put yourself out there and you are starting to enjoy something that your son loves. You don't know a thing about sports. I'm not trying to make fun of you. You also were very self-deprecating about it. But the fact that you have a sports-loving son and you were never interested in sports and didn't know anything about sports. The irony is not lost on me, but I want to hear how that has pushed you in a second. But let's talk about the main reasons why it is important to have friends in your life that are different than you. I sent you the list, Dan. You have the outline. Okay. From my nerd pad, I'll read the first one. The first reason is reduced prejudice and increased empathy, or just a broader perspective. And I thought this was fascinating. There's a lot of studies, a lot of research, but it says friends with different backgrounds, cultures, and beliefs can introduce you to new ideas and ways of looking at the world, helping you see beyond your own limited perspective. Understanding their perspectives fosters compassion and empathy.
We've talked about this offline, but there's this idea of the contact hypothesis, that if you make friends who are different from you, like it really... it can reduce polarization and bias and hatred. What's that? There's some expression from a former congressman whose name is escaping me right now. It's hard to hate up close. If you get to know somebody, especially if you're engaged, my understanding is this is especially true if you're engaged in a mutual activity, like some sort of civic organization where you're working toward a goal, a shared goal together. That it really, and essentially that's what you and I were doing as journalists. We were working toward making this show together.
Absolutely.
And it forced us to interact in deep, meaningful ways. And it just inexorably leads to sort of opening your mind. So I think that's really interesting and promising for us as a culture. Like, we seem so incredibly divided. We are so incredibly divided. The data, the research and the survey data back this up. But there is a way out.
I agree.
And it is to get to know it.
And I do think that we have to hold our media responsible for a lot of the division, Dan, because it feels like we live in two different worlds. I mean, if you were to look at one network's coverage as opposed to another the last couple of weeks, you'd think we lived in two different Americas just based on what we cover. And what we cover is determined by our bias. And when there isn't the ideological diversity, diversity of thought, all of that, in a newsroom, we're going to cover it a certain way and we're going to spin it a certain way. So I do think the media needs to be held accountable because it has created and sowed this division in our country. I do think at the end of the day, we're so much more united than we are divided. And yes, we're divided about certain things, but when you actually sit down and talk to someone and get to know them and befriend them, you understand where they're coming from, and you're not going to reduce them. You're not going to necessarily call them a bigot or a racist. And yes, some people need to be called out for their racism. Okay, it's inexcusable. But when you sit down with a mom and a friend and you understand, oh, she's voting this way because she has chronic illness and her kids have chronic illness and she wants to see, our Food and Drug Administration overhauled. Or you sit down with another family and they have a child that's, LGBTQ. You understand where they're coming from. And when you just sit down with the goal of learning and not agreeing, I like to tell my kids, God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth. So zip it and listen. And I'm trying to do a better job of this, but listening and learning. And I think we become moral narcissists when we think that our viewpoint is the only viewpoint. Broader perspective, understanding their perspectives fosters compassion and empathy. That's something you talk a lot about with 10% Happier, is compassion and empathy. Do you think that's something that you or your audience are able to exercise, Dan? I
think it's hard. It takes a lot of work.
Mm-hmm. It does.
But I do think it's possible. I love that phrase, moral narcissism. And, I come more out of a Buddhist context these days. When we first met, I was a little bit more of a straight up atheist, I would say. Now I'm more of like an agnostic / Buddhist. And, in the Dharma and the Buddhist teaching, there's a lot of emphasis on not being attached to your views. In fact, there's a quote from the Buddha that I love, which is, people who are, I'm going to mangle it, but it's roughly along the lines of, people who are overly attached to their views and opinions wander the world annoying other people. And I think that's just so hilarious and true.
It's true.
And there's some modern psychological research that shows that we cling to our views and opinions the way we cling to our possessions. When our views are challenged, it's the term that's often used among psychologists is seizing and freezing.
Huh.
And so this is all to say it's hard and necessary work to do. to just build on something you said about, if you're going to try this, if you're going to have a conversation with somebody you disagree with, if you feel, safe and resourced and sturdy enough to do it, the cardinal rule, from what I can tell, is to not try to change anybody's mind.
Right.
As you articulated there, Paula. I spent some time as a reporter with this group called the Braver Angels, whose system, this group brings together reds and blues from across America.
I love that.
Their system of conversation was designed by a marriage counselor, which I think is awesome. And this guy, Bill Doherty, who's been on my show, and the cardinal rule is never try to change anybody's mind. And what you should aim for instead is accurate disagreement. And I think that's fantastic. I do want to point out that I get on both sides why there are some people who would feel like it's unsafe to enter into this discussion. Because while I agree with you that the vast majority of human beings are moderate and fair-minded and not cruel, I think on the left, there are people who would look at Trump specifically and say, well, there's a pretty good track record to say he's anti-trans, racist, and misogynist. And I'm not saying any of these. I'm not making these accusations. But if you look at his past statements and policies, I think somebody on the left, including friends of mine who have trans kids, could draw that conclusion. I want to be fair and point out that on the right, there are a lot of people who are really worried specifically about abortion, which they view as murder, and might not feel like it's a safe place to have these discussions with somebody on the left. While we're encouraging people to explore friendships across the aisle or across gender or racial divides, I just want to, specifically as it pertains to politics, leave the door open to people who, for people to opt out if they don't feel like their nervous system can handle it.
Absolutely. But if you are going to venture into those waters, do so with the goal of learning and not agreeing. Just try to understand where the other person is coming from and what informs them. You're not going to change their mind. Like, when's the last time you ever sat down with somebody and they're like, oh, you make a good point, you've changed my... You're not going to change anybody's mind. But what you're going to do is you're going to understand, I understand now where she's coming from and why she's voting a certain way, because she has, her child is gay or trans, or I understand why this person is voting this way because her kid has chronic illness, or, because her daughter doesn't want to play against a male in female sports and get injured. Maybe that's happened to somebody. So I think just sitting down, understanding, like, I just want to listen. I don't have to agree. And you can respectfully disagree. Like, you don't have to be offended. Like, be unoffendable. Like, is there anything that you can say really that's going to offend me? No. I believe what I believe, Dan. You believe what you believe. What you believe isn't going to offend me. I think we all have a right to our own views, but assuming that our views are the only correct views, again, it can be called moral narcissism. Number one, it reduced prejudice and increased empathy, also known as a broader perspective. Number two, this is really fascinating, personal growth and critical thinking skills. You cannot, in debate, Dan, you took debate. You're a master debater, okay? Like, I'm assuming you took debate because you debate well. Did you ever take a debate class?
Yes,
okay.
I did.
I feel like you did. Dan, you couldn't accurately debate unless you were presented with opposing information, correct? Like,
yes.
Critical thinking, I'm a Christian. I firmly believe, you have to be ready to explain for the hope that is within you. And you do that by learning the facts. And the facts come from red states and blue states and purple states. You cannot develop critical thinking skills unless you're presented with opposing information. We cannot develop critical thinking skills if we're in our own echo chamber. Echo chambers, you're surrounded by people that look like you, think like you, sound like you, talk like you. That's closed-mindedness. Let's just call it what it is. I want to be open-minded, and all the research supports that interacting with people who hold different political opinions enhances cognitive complexity, which is the ability to consider multiple perspectives at once.
Yeah, just to build on that, there's also data to show that open-mindedness or cognitive complexity can can lead to a reduction in anxiety and a boost in happiness. And it also can lead to more success. This faculty of cognitive flexibility has been shown to lead to more successful startups and American presidencies. So there's a lot to be said here. And one way to do this, and the data are a little mixed on this one, but one way that I've found very helpful is to broaden my media diet, to not just read one outlet.
I agree with you wholeheartedly.
Or not just listen to one kind of podcast.
Yes.
It's been very helpful. It's a kind of self-gaslighting that can be really illuminating. I would just add one last thing. And, there's a difference between your opinions and your values. You can change your opinions, but nobody's asking you to like abandon your core values. So and understanding that difference creates, I think, more ease in all of this.
That's a really good caveat. So you can change your opinions, but you're not going to change. You don't have to change your core values. Yeah, one thing that would really frustrate me, especially during the election cycle, is that I would hear, I can't believe so-and-so endorsed Kamala. I'm never supporting them again. Or I can't believe so-and-so endorsed Trump. Or like Carrie Underwood when she sang at the inauguration, canceled everywhere. The cancel culture, like, why are we so offended? Why are we so offended? Yes, I understand there are very real issues going on that impact each of us, but each of us has a reason for voting a certain way, and we won't know what that reason is until we sit down and talk with someone. But the cancel culture is something that's so frustrating. If you aren't following somebody that challenges your ideology and makes you a little uncomfortable, Dan, then I think you need to branch out. Like, my media diet is similar to yours. Some of it just makes me a little cringy, but I need to hear it, right? If someone posts something on Instagram that I don't personally agree with, I'm not going to unfollow them because that's their right and that's their view. And my view isn't the only one. I have my core values and they have theirs. But the cancel culture, we're surrounding ourselves with like-minded individuals. And yes, to some extent, you need to have those types of individuals in your life, but it also leads to a very narrow-minded and closed-minded life and can lead to a lot of other issues, decreased empathy, like the things that we're very much talking about. So it is important. So I challenge anybody listening or watching to just diversify their media palette, diversify who they're following. Just open yourself up a little bit and try to be unoffendable. So I really love, Dan, ironically, I love the BBC and the AP, but I love following 1440. It's a newsletter. Yeah. It's a daily newsletter. You're familiar with them. Yeah. And 1440 is the year the printing press originated. But
it's also the number of minutes in a day, I think, right?
Yes, is it? So we talked about number 1, broader perspective and increased empathy. Number 2, personal growth, critical thinking. Number 3 and 4 are somewhat similar, greater emotional intelligence and better conflict resolution skills, which is fascinating. But I want to get into the increased social awareness that can come with having friends that are different. Social cohesion, social awareness, having diverse friends can help you become more aware of social issues and inequalities, promoting a more inclusive mindset. That's why it's important to have friends that are of different race, different religion, especially in a climate now, talking to your friends of color or talking to your LGBTQ friends, where are they coming from? Where are your friends? All different aspects. I think that the social awareness aspect, just being socially aware and not so socially limited and narrow, is really, really important. And it can help bridge social divides.
I think what I'm about to say is true, but I'll just float it. To me, like the bottom line of all of these, and we're listing these various benefits that have shown up in the research. But to me, they all kind of come down to empathy and compassion. The ability, which can sound a little bit like eating your vegetables, but people with more empathy and compassion are healthier. And this is a research-backed finding. There are health benefits to increasing your compassion. And I think it might be worth saying a little bit about the differences between empathy and compassion and some of the fears that people have when they're told that compassion is good for them, especially in this context around politics. Just to say, the empathy generally is understood as feeling other people's feelings. And that can be overwhelming. It can lead to burnout. Compassion it's a little bit of a tweak on that inner posture. It's feeling other people's feelings plus having the desire to help. So that little tweak is ennobling and empowering, even when there's nothing you can do. So if you're watching images of people suffering on the news, even if you have this little phrase in your mind, may you be free from suffering, which is a Buddhist phrase, that change, or, you could make it, you can tweak it to whatever faith tradition you come from.
It's
that
basically
changes
a prayer.
your inner posture.
It's a chant or a prayer, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So that's just one thing to say. And then the other thing to say is I hear a lot from people, oh, you're a privileged white guy, comfortable. I mean, you're preaching compassion, but I can't do that. I can't afford that luxury. And the first half of that is true, that I am a privileged white guy. And the second half of that, I think, is up for debate. I'm not here to tell anybody how they should live, and you don't have to listen to me at all. But from my understanding of not only the modern psychological research, but also the contemplative traditions that are so powerful for so many of us today, from the Abrahamic traditions to Buddhism, there is this emphasis on a kind of a wise selfishness, to use the term that the Dalai Lama uses, that is in your best interest. And Paula, you used this word before, like understanding why somebody voted the way they voted. Understanding that if you came out of that womb and lived that life, you would likely have the same views as that person. That is very different from endorsing it or being a doormat or giving that person a hug. It's just a mere understanding of why people do what they do and the fact that you might do those same things. That's my understanding of compassion, and it doesn't make you weaker. It actually, according to the data, makes you stronger. It's a cleaner burning fuel if you want to be effective in the world. I
like that distinction. It's actually trying to do something about it, even if that's a mantra, a chant, or a prayer, because it does empower you to want to make the situation better instead of just carrying that burden, because that's what empathy can kind of feel like. I'm putting myself in their shoes and I'm carrying that burden, but then what am I supposed to do about it? So compassion kind of empowers you to do something about it, even if it's something as simple as a chant or a mantra or a prayer. So
yes,
that's really, I would agree with you, Dan. I think that compassion and empathy is kind of the underlying value, the common denominator in all of this that we're talking about. The last benefit is the mental and emotional health benefits. Research suggests that diverse social networks can positively impact mental health by reducing prejudice and promoting a sense of belonging. I'll give you an example of like reducing prejudice. A couple of different examples, Dan. When we talk about having people in your life that are different, we live in a small town in South Carolina. We don't really have, we have trailers and mobile homes here. We have Appalachia. We have a lot of poverty, but poverty looks a lot different. When you say trailer park or mobile home, what comes to your mind, right? My kids have friends that live in mobile homes and trailer parks. I had certain narratives in my mind about what that looked like. They're totally different than what it looks like. Also, on the other hand, I think having the socioeconomic diversity in my kids' lives, yes, they're growing up totally different than I did. We grew up with very little. I mean, very little. My kids pretty much have everything they could ever need or want, but understanding that that's not always the case for everyone, understanding that diversity looks like socioeconomic diversity. And some of these kids at school can't afford a school lunch. They can't afford a backpack. What can we do to step in and fill that gap? But having an understanding of some of those differences, changing the narratives and the norms too, exposing my kids. Yes, they're friends. Some of them live in trailer parks and mobile homes. And that, to me, is diversity. That's a different kind of diversity that we don't talk about enough. It's socioeconomic diversity, making sure that we are talking about these people, regardless of your socioeconomic status, with dignity and respect, because it's not about how much money is in your bank account. And I am being vulnerable here, and I hope people don't turn this against me, but I've learned a lot about my own preconceived notions. We all have prejudices. We all have biases, and you don't really realize that you have those sometimes until you're put in that situation. I want to continue to be pushed. I want to grow. I want to critically think. I want to be compassionate. I want to be empathetic. And Dan, I want to ask you, I know this is kind of just a small and even microcosm example of what we're talking about, but you never liked sports. You couldn't care less about sports, and now your son loves them. how has that opened up your world to put yourself in Alexander's world? Do you have this sports-loving son and you couldn't give a flying freak about sports, but now you're in it? Like, how has that opened up your world?
They still maybe dismiss the fact that, especially when men who don't know each other are together, they would just revert to talking about sports as a empty small talk at, sports and lawn care or whatever. But
sports,
actually, I found that being conversant in sports has allowed me to connect with people that I might not otherwise connect with. And many of these people are quite different from me. And it's not only the fellow dads here in suburban New York, but people I encounter in the course of my day-to-day life moving through the world who may not have anything really to do with my intimate life. I can connect with them about sports and going to these sporting events, where, you're just interacting with lots of people. My son is a big fan of the Commanders because my brother-in-law is a pro scout for the Commanders. And
I don't know
we've traveled to go to a lot of the games. Yeah, that's a big part of this. So we've traveled to all over the country to go to Commanders games. And, we meet other Commanders fans who are staying in the same hotel with us. And this whole discussion at root is about empathy and compassion.
Yeah.
And what is that if not connection? And what do we know about the human animal? We know that the human animal is deeply social. That is how we survived as a species. And we live in a world that, as I often say, militates against social connection. And the extent to which you can counter-program against these larger societal forces that want you with your nose in your phone, want you stuck in your own information silo, want you pursuing your own individualistic aims without thinking about the larger good. If you can turn the volume down on some of these very powerful macro forces and make sure that your life has social connection, not only with your friends and family and other intimates, but also just the world writ large, it is going to be in your best interest. And
I agree.
That's why the Dalai Lama talks about wise selfishness.
Dana, this whole evolution, the compassion evolution and journey that you've been on is just so fascinating to me. The empathy evolution. So I love to see this side of you.
I'm still going to make mean jokes to you.
Yeah, but when you're going to make the jokes when it's like not when we're recording, and then people will think I'm the jerk. It's always going to backfire on me. Because I can't keep my mouth shut and you have perfect timing. It's the truth, right? And we'll leave it at that. But I just want to say I am a more critical thinker. I'm a better person. I'm a more well-rounded person because of having friends like you in my life. So I'm not going to say that I owe everything about myself to you. Okay, Dan, I draw a line. All right. I know you're waiting for me to give you a little bit more, but I'm not. That's the most I'm going to concede. So, but I do think we were a good team because we really respected the hell out of one another, but we pushed one another respectfully and we respected where the other person was coming from, even if it wasn't where we were coming from. So that's all I want to say.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I completely agree. And just so you're not hanging out there alone on this brave admission you made before about having had preconceived notions about specific communities of people, I'll say that before I started reporting on evangelicals and before I became such close friends with you, I had lots of preconceived notions. There's that infamous line from the Washington Post about evangelicals that they're uneducated and easily led. That's bullshit. Many, many, many evangelicals are extremely highly educated, and there's an enormous amount of diversity within the evangelical world and a lot of intellectual ferment and fervor. And so, yeah, spending time with you and lots of other folks who come from a similar background has opened my eyes. And so, yeah, I appreciate you.
So basically, you owe everything to me, is what you're saying.
Yes.
Okay, we'll just leave it right there so you can't come back with a snarky response. I'm kidding. I still think the Jew and the Gentile has a ring to it if you ever want to do a podcast or some sort of show. What I would love to do, Dan, I'm going to put this out there. I think a really powerful show could be you take two polar opposites, okay? Maybe they're ideologically opposed. They're opposed in some capacity, but they're essentially seen as being on two sides, two opposite sides of the spectrum. and you bring them together in a show and they're doing one thing together that they have in common. Maybe they both love to cook Indian food, or maybe they both love to play tennis, or they like to crochet, or they like to deep sea fish or something. But you find that one thing in common with two diametrically opposed people, and you create a show about it. And then imagine the conversations that they could have while they are participating in this one thing that they have in common. I think that could go a long way. And I still hold the media, I think, responsible and liable for creating a lot of the division, because we are not as diametrically opposed as it feels like we are at times. We do have a lot more in common. We need more compassion, more empathy. And I think it starts by focusing on what we do have in common and listening and learning. So anyway, you want to EP that show with me?
Sure.
Okay. I think, do you think it's a terrible idea? You can be honest.
No, I think it's a terrific idea. Bill Doherty from Braver Angels should be your
Why don't you
moderator.
You want to connect me?
Sure.
I just want to be an EP. I just want to put it out there because I think it could be a really powerful show.
Yeah.
So
I agree.
Yeah. All righty. Well, I love you, friend. Addie, do you want to say anything? She was bored to death by this conversation, by the way.
Awesome.
She slept the whole time. But send hugs to Alexander and to Bianca, and I'll tell the kids that I had a great day with Mr. Dan, as they still call you. And John says hi, by the way.
Yes, say hi to the family. Love you right back,
Okay.
and thanks for doing all the work as usual.
I'm glad we're friends. I'm so glad we're friends, Dan. Yeah, I did do all the work, by the way. But that's all right. That's all right. See, look at you. Look at that open admission right there. But no, I'm happy too. I'm glad that we were able to do this. I love you, friend. Thanks for pushing me to be a better version of myself, and sometimes just pushing me. So, gosh, I miss that guy so much. I miss his family. I miss his wife, Bianca, his son, Alexander. And I hope you could feel the love and admiration and deep respect within that conversation. And yes, it is true. On several occasions, he commissioned my son, JJ, who I think the first time was age 9, to manage his fantasy football team. And JJ did beat a bunch of almost 50-year-old guys. So true story right there. But my takeaways within this conversation, a couple of things that Dan said that really stood out. And by the way, these conversations, we continue to go deeper in these conversations. If you're subscribed to my personal newsletter at paulaferrisofficial.com, we do giveaways, and it's an authentic look at my life as a busy working mom, but also you get a sneak peek at what's coming up in the podcast, and it's a way to go deeper into these conversations. But a couple of things that Dan said that really stood out. He said, people who are overly attached to their views and opinions wander the world annoying other people. And it's so true. Don't be that person. None of us should aspire to be that person, because all it does is it annoys other people. He also said it's hard to hate up close. If you get to know somebody, especially if you're engaged, it is hard to hate up close. The goal isn't to change somebody. The goal is just to listen and learn. You don't need to sit down and have a conversation to change somebody else's opinion. But once you get to talking to somebody who may be a little bit different than you, it's hard to hate them up close. You see their perspective. You understand a little bit more about what informs their views and why. And Dan explained a really good differentiator between compassion and empathy. We know empathy is the ability to feel another person's emotions, but compassion, he says, is a tweak. It's not only feeling the other person's feelings, but it's then having the desire to help. And he said it could be something simple like a prayer or a mantra, even saying, may you be free from suffering. But compassion is the desire to want to help on top of that. For me, the importance of having friends in our lives that are different than us, it can't be underscored. It leads to a broader perspective, as you heard within that conversation. It leads to personal growth. It leads to improved empathy. It leads to social awareness. It leads to a lot of mental health benefits. And look, if we're just surrounding ourselves with people who look like us and think like us and see the world like us, that's anti-growth. And I don't think that's a really healthy place for any of us to be, even though that is kind of our comfort zone, right? So we have to push ourselves out of our comfort zone. And look, I'm not saying that this has to be someone in your inner circle. And we talked about the difference between an outer circle / acquaintance or somebody in your inner circle last week. But it is important to have people in your life who just see the world a lot differently. I'm better because of it. And I think it calls out my own inherent bias and preconceived notions and makes me a better, more well-rounded person. And so I hope that's what you got from the conversation today. We were both pretty vulnerable. I hope it doesn't backfire on us, but you can have deep admiration and respect for somebody that is totally different from you. And it really opens your world up. So next week, as we continue this series on friendship, my husband, John, is joining the conversation. Should you be best friends with your partner? I have to say, my thoughts about this have evolved. Make sure you tune in next week as we continue to talk about it. We'll see you next week. I know you guys thought you were done with me, but not quite yet. I have one more thing to tell you about. If you're watching on YouTube or you're listening on your favorite podcast platform, don't forget to subscribe to the show. I don't want you to miss a single beat or a single conversation. And remember, my DMs are always open. Tell me what you want to talk about.